my gentle and of course very modern apes, you might not know this, but I have 3 dogs. You could actually probably hear the nail tippy taps of one of them in the background right now, and she just flummoxed onto the ground. Here's Teddy, she's my first. Teddy is goofy, she is diligent, she is kind of stupid, but she has a charm about her. They say oftentimes humans resemble their dogs in personality. We got Fred. Fred is our second dog. He's actually technically, chronologically, our 3rd dog. He was a happenstance case, a happy accident, if you will. Our 3rd here is Luna. She is our boxer mix. She was my husband's before we got married. She is our oldest. She is our wisest. And she is our most low maintenance of the 3. As you can see, she's already bailing, unlike this one, or this one. Teddy was actually mine before Luke and I got married, so we go way back. She's younger than Luna by about a year. So Luna is 7, Teddy is 6, and Fred is 4, and we acquired Fred. We got him by kind of an early inheritance from my mother-in-law, who is still alive and well, but asked us to take care of him for a little while because she didn't have a backyard. And he just kind of stuck. After that, we just couldn't get rid of him. We couldn't bear to. And so my husband and I, we share our home with 3 dogs, 3 canines, 3 members of a completely different order of animals, and we love it. I think about that a lot, and I bring it up to my husband a lot. Like, isn't it kind of weird that we live in this house with 3 pretty big carnivores? And like, the answer to that little musing is, yeah, it's really weird. No other animal, at least that we know of, seems to do this, at least not in the way that humans and dogs kind of arrange our relationship. You might hear about domestication in other animals, like how ants have domesticates in the form of farming aphids, which are little sap-sucking insects, or they maintain fungus farms. Or you might have heard too about the case of the Hamadryas baboons that kidnap puppies and then kind of raise them alongside their troops. But both of these examples, and indeed all of the others that I've ever seen, kind of pale. In fact, they do pale in comparison to the relationship that humans have with dogs. Now, to be clear, it's not a categorical difference. The domestication of dogs, the relationship between humans and dogs, seems to be, at least at present, a pretty symbiotic one, and we see this in other parts of the animal kingdom. So this is not a categorical difference, it is an extreme one of degree. Like, I'm an ape. I am a member of the order Primates, and my dogs are canines. They are members of the order Carnivora. Our lineages have a rich history of competing fiercely in many different environments, and yet today, we don't just consider dogs allies, we consider them family and friends, and vice versa. We have quite literally co-evolved with one another for tens of thousands of years and represent one of the oddest and most unique relationships in the animal kingdom today. So if you're watching this, it means I hit 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. This is a goal that I did not, in my wildest dreams, think I would meet. I know a lot of YouTubers say that when they hit these kinds of milestones, but I guess you can take it from me. It really does seem basically unachievable when you are a small channel, and when you have the pleasure of reaching it, thanks to you guys, it feels it feels kind of surreal. And so to commemorate this occasion, I wanted to remake one of the first videos that I ever made that was strictly just to educate. It was also my first video to get any kind of real attention. When it hit 10,000 views, I just about went through the roof. And so I thought I would remake it with better audio, better visuals, access to stock footage, and of course packed to the brim with information that I've learned in the meantime. And so I really hope you enjoy it. From the bottom of my gentle and of course very modern heart, I wanted to thank you for giving this channel, Gutsick Gibbon, the attention that you have given it over the years, and I hope we continue to move forward together. This is a story about violence, alliance, and triumph. It's the story of 2 species learning to live together and coming to love one another. It's a story about dogs and the strange beasts they came to dominate the world with. It's the late Pleistocene, somewhere in the 3rd marine isotopic stage. Much of Eurasia is a frigid wasteland for much of the year, with only the southerly regions experiencing temperate niceties. In this windswept age, giant mammals are on the move. Woolly mammoths and rhinos, cervids great and small, the mighty auroch, and even horses make their living in a time with glacial advance and retreat. Hunting them on this unforgiving terrain are frightful creatures equipped with terrible weapons. Scimitar cats of many sizes, cave hyenas and bears, leopards and dhole could all be found in the vast steppes and deep forests. Also on this landscape are the largest canid of the time, a gray wolf-like animal and the only endemic ape to the region, the Neanderthal. These predators competed fiercely for access to choice prey, with obligate carnivores like the big cats cornering the market, while more flexible omnivores broadened their plates. Hunting strategies varied wildly. Quick-footed saber-toothed cats could easily fell large deer, as could the jaws of a leopard. Lightly built dhole stuck to small game, while solitary bears foraged and occasionally brought down prey with their powerfully built forelegs and claws. The big meals went to the pack hunters. Wolves and hyenas hunted in groups, capable of bringing down mammoth and rhino, each more than willing to steal from the other. Neanderthals, too, were group hunters, their tribes using handmade weapons and fire to kill or potentially steal their meals. Each of these predators were robustly built for this environment because this was the environment that honed them. This is where they evolved for the most part, and they competed with one another here on this stage for tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years. But that was all about to change because from the south, an invader was on the move. I want to stop here for a second and ask a question that I think a lot of people have asked. Why didn't Neanderthals domesticate the wolves first? I don't think that it's that Neanderthals couldn't have. I don't think that there was some kind of mental block or intelligence requirement that they didn't meet that kept them from being able to domesticate wolves. I think our best guess at present is that it was a mixture of novelty and disposition on the part of both humans and wolves to the exclusion of Neanderthals. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. So to quickly define our terms here, Neanderthals are members of a species whose nomenclature is Homo neanderthalensis. So they're in our genus, but they don't share our species. We are anatomically modern Homo sapiens, and we are members of genus Homo as well, but our species is Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens began in Africa, whereas Homo neanderthalensis began in Europe. And there are other hominins who aren't the star of the show today that were also living at the same time, who had their origins elsewhere. Members of genus Homo first left Africa nearly 2 million years ago in an event that probably took multiple attempts. Their exodus left populations of hominins all across Eurasia, which gave rise to species we know today from the fossil record, but likely met way back when. Homo erectus had populations persist in Asia, some evolving into Denisovans and the East Asian Archaics. Some propose that Homo erectus also gave rise to the diminutive Homo floresiensis and Homo luzonensis, although it may be that these hominins came from an earlier migration of hominins out of Africa. In Europe, Homo erectus, through several convolutions, gave rise to Homo neanderthalensis, a robust hominin commonly argued as being adapted to the cold. The members of Homo erectus, sensu lato, back in Africa would, over millions of years, give rise to the more lightly built and arguably more innovative ape that we know as our own species, Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens itself would leave Africa around 70,000 years ago, specifically arriving in Europe 45,000 years ago. Put a pin in that date, it's important. Much ink has been spilled on how different Homo sapiens and Homo neanderthalensis actually are. Homo sapiens and Homo neanderthalensis could in fact interbreed, at least some of the time, and produce viable offspring. Now, these days, most geneticists will argue that there was probably an element of hybrid sterility to the offspring. According to mitochondrial work, the argument goes that male offspring between a Neanderthal Homo sapiens cross would have been sterile, as opposed to the fertile, or at least more commonly fertile, female offspring. This suggests that we were well on our way to becoming reproductively isolated species, a process that may have continued to completion had they not gone extinct. Now, like Neanderthals, Homo sapiens was a pack hunter capable of advanced tool and fire use. Unlike Neanderthals, Homo sapiens had never seen wolves before. We knew big cats, cackling hyenas, and smaller, more solitary dogs. Our homeland had naked elephants and naked rhinos. Boy, we knew about edible herd-living horned things too, although fun fact, there aren't many deer on the savannah. So Homo sapiens is the new predator on the scene. We move into Eurasia, and we see a lot of different critters that are at least familiar to us, so of course this is no problem. Large pack-hunting dogs were new, and they liked to eat the same things as we did. Uh-oh. Let's pause and ask another question. Did Homo sapiens domesticate wolves, or did wolves domesticate themselves? Or perhaps was it a combination of both natural selection and artificial selection? What I'm going to argue is that natural selection is responsible for our initial alliance, followed by a quick uptake of artificial selection on the part of humans, but we'll get to that later. We have a landscape of ferociously competing predators, and a new one has just arrived on the scene. Homo sapiens lived in larger groups than Neanderthals, which meant more hands to hold a weapon, but also more mouths to feed. This meant that humans may have been driven to hunt larger animals more often, a set of circumstances that may have been the meet cute for them and wolves, as like modern predators, they fought to maintain control of these kills, ancient Homo sapiens and ancient wolves, each commonly stealing mammoth kills from one another. That's not the type of relationship that we see today. But how do you go from an adversarial pairing like this just 45,000 years ago to a solid alliance? The first steps may have been set into motion when wolves first evolved. Like humans, wolves are extremely social, curious, and intelligent animals. Each pack has the fundamental unit of a pair-bonded male and female, much like human couples, and members of each group are fiercely loyal. Wolves are notorious for their ability to hunt over long distances, reminiscent of the persistence hunting strategy seen in many human groups. So on the face of it, this set of characteristics seems antithetical to what we typically consider as a good domesticate, which are docile and easy to control. But it turns out that this collection of characters is actually ideal when directed at the right or wrong target. One of the more popular hypotheses for the domestication of dogs from wolves is rooted in natural selection. In wolves, both males and females alike disperse from their natal pack once they reach sexual maturity. This is a characteristic that is seen in a lot of social animals that prevents inbreeding. These are our famous lone wolves. They're not alone because they're these cool sigma animals that refuse to bend to the will of the pack. They got kicked out so they wouldn't accidentally procreate with one of their siblings, and in the meantime they're alone until they can find a mate and form a new pack. Now remember, wolves are pack hunting animals. They rely on other members of their pack to bring down large game. So a wolf that is alone is not able to bring down bigger prey animals and must rely on smaller, less reliable ones. Picture a lone wolf trotting along a tree line in the late Pleistocene. Snow gently falls and hunger gnaws at her stomach. A young female, having just left her home range. She has no pack to hunt with, and she has had nothing but stiff picked-over deer hide to eat for months. As she crests the hill, she picks up the metallic scent of blood coupled with smoke. In the valley, a group of humans butchers a carcass by a roaring fire, throwing some viscera to the side. The wolf dares not approach. She's seen these creatures scare her pack from a kill before, but she hasn't eaten in days. She waits until dusk, when the humans are away from the refuse pile and obscured by their strange dens and fires, before creeping up to the pile of discarded flesh. Her teeth cut into meat, still warm despite the plummeting temperatures. Suddenly, a light is thrown upon her. A human clothed in skin that reeks of bear, wielding a flaming stick, shouts at her, his spear already poised to launch. But the wolf pauses, the taste of iron still on her tongue. She meets the human's eyes, watching as he hesitates with his weapon before stopping, picking up a stone, and hurling it near her feet. She starts, meeting his eyes again before fleeing into the bitter night. This is not the last time they will meet. The flight distance hypothesis proposes that domestication was at least triggered by either desperate or curious wolves scavenging near human refuse piles. In this case, the wolves are basically self-selecting. Less aggressive individuals who were less prone to flight would approach human settlements more often, stick around longer, and come back more frequently. In this way, they would slowly but surely habituate the humans to their presence and increase their fitness as compared to the more skittish or more aggressive lone wolves who weren't effectively being provisioned and had to fend for themselves. So these provisioned wolves are getting a leg up on the other lone packless wolves by basically scavenging around these human debris piles, refuse piles, and just hanging around the settlements in general and eating the stuff that the humans don't really want. So what are the humans getting out of it? Well, the story goes that if humans got to the point where they would tolerate these wolves being around their trash heaps, their dumps, for lack of a better term, and not every human settlement probably did tolerate it, but the ones who did probably began to notice something very interesting, which is that the wolves would defend these refuse piles not from humans, but from other predators, effectively acting as an alarm system for the settlement as a whole. The saber-toothed cat smells the refuse itself and comes by to get a bite, and the wolf just goes nuts, barking and howling and growling and alerting every human within a mile of its presence. It is at this point, which would have happened pretty early, that a commensalistic relationship becomes a mutualistic one, and tolerance becomes appreciation. It's really easy to see how this might happen. Wolves even today have been known to habituate to human presence and behave in friendly ways towards them. Likely due to their social systems, curiosity, and intelligence, wolves and humans were predisposed to this relationship in a way that other animals were not. But a better question might be, why didn't this happen to Neanderthals, and much earlier at that? The answer may genuinely lie in the novelty. Neanderthals evolved in Eurasia and had always known wolves as threats, while Homo sapiens were only just exposed. This, combined with perhaps the more innovative nature of the latter hominin, allowed a new type of relationship. It isn't hard to see how, once humans and wolves tolerate one another's presence, they begin to hunt alongside one another in complementary ways. Wolves, with their incredible sense of smell, can aid in finding game, while humans use their numbers and weapons to bring prey down. Generation after generation, wolves are selectively encouraged to breed by humans, and their friendly tendencies and ability to cooperate with us are amplified further. So believe it or not, the study of the domestication of dogs, the where, when, how, why of it all, is actually extremely controversial. The one thing that everybody seems to agree on, as far as I can tell though, is that the split between dogs and the last common ancestor that they share with modern gray wolves occurred somewhere between 27,000 years ago and 40,000 years ago. At the other end of the timeline, we have the Bonn Oberkassel dog, the very first for real 100% this is a dog, buried intentionally alongside humans around 14,000 years ago. So the domestication then definitely occurred somewhere in between 14,000 years ago and 40,000 years ago. Can we narrow this down at all? Well, as usual, genetics and paleontology together come to rescue the plot. Dogs and wolves are extremely closely related, but they do have clockable differences both genetically and morphologically. Dogs, for instance, have more neonatal craniodental features that make them more endearing to us. Wolves, additionally, have fewer copies of the AMY2B gene, and so on and so forth. I'm sure you can see the impending problem, but let's just go ahead and put a pin in that as well for now. We have a great deal of canid remains at ancient human settlements, but we also have a great deal of a lot of different types of animal remains that were butchered there and used for food or other types of resources. So how do you actually tell the first member of the dog group, man's best friend, from the regular old big bad wolf? Well, let's start most recently and move back in time. As previously mentioned, the first for sure dog in the archaeological record is the Bonn Oberkassel specimen, and it's a puppy. Found in Germany, this dog is special for more reasons than one. Firstly, the mitochondrial work on this animal reveal it is not only definitively a domestic dog, but the ancestor of some of the dogs that are still living today. This is recognizable as a bona fide, or should I say bona fido? You have to laugh, this is my 100K special. Modern dog. Perhaps more importantly though, this dog was intentionally buried with a human couple. Alone, this already indicates that humans around this puppy considered it to be important, but the pathology found in the dog's jaws indicate that it died of distemper, and it was not the first time that it had this disease. Distemper is a nasty disease that severely weakens the canines who contract it, and they need effectively constant care to make it through alive. Distemper is also interesting because it leaves recognizable marks at the gum line. So what this means is that this puppy contracted distemper, was nursed back to health, and then had another bout of distemper that eventually killed it. But the ones who nursed it back to health were its humans. So the Bon Arbor Castle specimen is definitively a domestic dog by physical criteria, and it has all of the behavioral marks of cohabitation and mutual affection with humans. What this means is that the absolute latest that domestication happened was around 15,000 years ago, which means that the latest possible date still firmly cements dogs as the very first domesticated animal, and it's not even close. The vast majority of researchers, however, agree that the real timing of domestication was far earlier in time indeed, and we have a lot more to suss out. Up to approximately 16,000 years ago, we see many likely dogs from remains all across Europe, with a handful of postcranial remains from France being the last bit of material that is unequivocally a domestic dog on the basis of genomic analysis. Then things start to get a little fuzzy, or I should say furry. They start to get a little furry. Dog-like remains dated to around 17,000 years ago were found in Siberia, but the original material is lost. The inference of dogness is made due to the measurements associated with the described skull's snout length, which is shorter than those of wolves. Similarly, 2 skulls from Russia have been found near ancient human settlements around the same time frame, which appear to be genetically domestic dogs. But geometric morphometrics on that material propose that these animals are still too wolfish in dimensions to be dogs in full. Okay, so we have a problem that I hope is pretty evident. How do you actually define a dog, and how do you actually define a wolf, and what do you do with all of the stuff that spans the difference? Should we define a dog as only things that fall within modern dog variation, or should we define a dog as anything that is sort of moving away from that archetypal ancient wolf form in the direction, or at least the seeming direction, of modern dogs? Obviously, the big problem here is, again, biology is super duper squishy. And whether we're talking about species or subspecies, you are never going to be able to properly apply static human-made concepts to a dynamic system like speciation or evolution. Okay, so speciation is a type of evolution, but you get what I'm trying to say, right? We can't expect nature to conform to our very concrete ideas of binning things when nothing in biology is like that, because the entire thing is a gradient, kind of like what evolution predicts. We're going to be using the definition that I like the most because it's my channel and I get to do what I want, and I think this is the one that is the most useful and the most appropriate, which is that you can have modern wolves, modern dogs, ancient wolves, and Paleolithic dogs. And Paleolithic dogs are going to be any critters that are spanning the difference between ancient wolves and modern dog variation, and that's going to apply even if they leave no modern descendants, because as it turns out, there wasn't just one domestication event that was successful and led to all modern dogs. In fact, it seems that we have a lot of domestication events that made it pretty far and changed these ancient wolf populations that they were dealing with, that they considered quite a bit, but not all the way. These lineages that went extinct, we call them aborted domestication events. Those are still Paleolithic dogs under my definition. So to make things concise here, a Paleolithic dog is going to be any canid remains found in a human settlement that are clearly not an ancient wolf, a modern wolf, or a modern dog. So after we passed 17,000 years ago, we're dealing with a whole host of Paleolithic dogs, things that aren't quite wolves and aren't quite dogs, but fall somewhere in the middle. And the question then becomes, well, where do these Paleolithic dogs start? Where do we find the first thing that is distinct from ancient wolves? Now, genetically, we remember that that time frame is 27,000 years ago to 40,000 years ago, but morphology may help us narrow it down a bit further. At around 18,000 years ago, we have the adorably named Dogor, a frozen Siberian permafrost puppy. This little cutester was argued to be a potential Paleolithic dog on the basis of some of its physical characteristics, but genetic testing has revealed that it's probably just a wolf, and the confusion came from the fact that it was such a youngster. Modern dogs are more neonatal than modern wolves. That means they retain some of the physical characteristics that they have when they were puppies into adulthood. And this is probably because of us. We probably selected these characteristics because they make them look cuter. Although an alternative hypothesis is that these characteristics are kind of hangers-on with selecting for friendliness. The point being, it's going to be a lot harder to tell a Paleolithic dog from an ancient wolf if both are puppies, as compared to if both are adults. Around 26,000 years ago, we have a beautiful trail of footprints in France of a young human and a large canine. These tracks are associated with soot, indicating the human was bearing fire, and they are found near a cave notorious for art. Some have proposed that the tracks belong to a dog, while others suggest that it's a wolf. I'm not an expert on ichnofossils, but if canines are recapitulating what we know from other species, then it's possible that you could have something that is basically almost a modern dog, a Paleolithic dog well on its way, that still has footprints that look pretty wolfish, because not all portions of an animal are evolving at the same rate. They're not evolving at the same tempo. But my main commentary is that if this is a Paleolithic dog, that is extremely cute. 30,000 years ago, a Siberian skull was found that could not neatly fall into the dog or wolf category, and this is going to be the theme moving forward, whether we're looking at genetics or morphology. The Altai dog in particular is interesting, as the genetic work on the material has twice deemed it a wolf and twice deemed it a dog, with morphology pulling it towards the latter. More recently, it has been considered an aborted domestication event, making it, by our definition, a Paleolithic dog. Also around this time frame is the incredibly tantalizing site of Predmosty. Located in the Czech Republic, there are putative wolves at this site, and they look starkly different from the proposed Paleolithic dogs that are also found there. The Paleolithic dogs display short muzzles, broad palates, and smaller carnassials that are characteristic of modern dogs. These dogs also appear to have been treated differently, one being buried with a mammoth bone placed in its jaws in a potentially ceremonial fashion. The Paleolithic dogs also have facial injuries not seen in the wolf remains that are proposed to be either from one another or from humans attempting early training. Further, isotopic and microanalyses indicate the dogs' diets differed from those of the wolves at the site, potentially suggesting that humans were indeed provisioning them with their less desirable scraps. Microwear work specifically, but elsewhere, suggests that Paleolithic dogs have a higher proportion of bone in their diet, again indicative of scrap provisioning by humans. So I think this is pretty striking. At Predmosty, you have wolves and Paleolithic dogs, and the latter are clearly being treated differently than the former. They are being intentionally buried with artifacts in their mouths. They are being fed something different, at least that's what their isotopic and microanalyses suggest, and they have facial injuries that are unique. To me, Predmosty seems like a no-brainer, but put a pin in this site because we're going to talk more about it later. Dating to nearly 37,000 years ago, the Goyet or Goyer dog has a morphology reminiscent of dogs from perhaps 18,000 years younger than it. Fascinatingly, it was found in a side cave of a human settlement alongside tools and other artifacts. Genetic work on this specimen suggests it is directly related to neither modern dogs nor wolves, suggesting an entirely unique aborted domestication event from a closely related but different canine ancestor. This specimen and the others we've already discussed, I think, provide some pretty decent support to an earlier domestication date, like more on the 40,000 years ago side of things as opposed to the 27,000 years ago side of things. The last potential Paleolithic dog is dated to between 36,000 years ago and 40,000 years ago and is known only from a maxillary fragment containing a handful of teeth. It again looks dog-ish, and it's found alongside human art, but as with the rest of these specimens, it is controversial nonetheless. So before 40,000 years ago, we don't really have anything that is even maybe a Paleolithic dog, just a lot of humans using wolf remains for tools or decoration. So if there was a non-adversarial relationship between humans and canids before 40,000 years ago, I don't think we have any support for it just yet, and I think the odds of finding any is probably pretty slim given that genetic divergence date's older end is 40,000 years ago, and this divergence date seems to be the only thing that people in this area of research seem to even agree on. So then, using that broader but I think fair definition of a Paleolithic dog, humans and dogs seem to be doing cohabitation and interacting with one another for tens of thousands of years, and it seems to be mostly in West Asia and in Europe. Genetic evidence supports this locality for the beginnings of domestication, as well as a potential replacement event from much later Asian dogs around 10,000 years ago. So we have our why-ish, our when-ish, and our where-ish for dog domestication from ancient wolves, although the story's details are probably going to continue to get fleshed out as more data comes to light. But we still have some complementary data that we must consider within the context of everything that we've learned so far. And what about the how-ish? What physiological changes had to happen in wolves and humans alike to allow for this alliance to occur? So first, I think we need to consider the modern dingo in all of this. And this is because the modern dingo has been proposed, softly, by some biological anthropologists like Pat Shipman to occupy kind of a living middle point in the domestication of ancient wolves to modern dogs. Shipman points out that modern dingoes are genetically distinct from wolves and dogs alike and behave in intermediate ways. The Aboriginal groups that interact with dingoes often acquire them by stealing them from dingo dens as puppies. Dingoes then work closely with these people as they are raised as companions, exhibiting extreme separation anxiety when removed from the individuals that they have bonded with. They're allowed to leave if they please upon reaching adulthood, which they sometimes do and sometimes don't. It's already kind of an odd relationship, but it's made even stranger by the fact that the Aboriginal groups that work with these dingoes, they don't artificially select for offspring. They don't keep the dingoes and have them breed in captivity and then select for characters in the offspring. They acquire them by getting them from dens. The dingoes reach adulthood, they either stay or they go, and that's kind of the end of the human input. Dingoes are intermediate between dogs and wolves in many specific behaviors. They will hold human eye contact longer than wolves, but not as long as dogs, howl like the former, and breed like neither. So all of this paints a picture of a willing participant in human society that is not directly being artificially selected in any given direction. This is why Shipman proposes that the dingo might be an intermediate, sort of near the root of dog domestication from ancient wolves. Of course, all of that has to start with humans directly stealing dingo puppies from dens, something that I don't think they have any say in, but the choice of many of these individuals to stay is fascinating to say the least. Of course, it could also be that these characteristics are independently derived. We just don't know yet. Shipman also makes another unique argument with regard to dog domestication in her book, The Invaders, which suggests that dog domestication was in part responsible for the extinction of the Neanderthals. Neanderthals had new competition once humans arrived on the scene in Eurasia, and they also didn't hunt mammoth very often as compared to Homo sapiens, which was much more likely to attempt this larger game. The idea is that the alliance of humans and wolves allowed Homo sapiens to take on larger targets and to do so more often. This notion may be supported by locations like Predmosty, which is simultaneously one of the first Paleolithic dog locations and one of the largest mammoth kill sites in all of archaeology. Shipman posits that the alliance of humans and wolves allowed the former to seriously expand their plate and the latter to secure a more consistent food source in the form of human scraps. As humans and their Paleolithic dogs were changing, so was the climate, and this impacted the entire ecosystem. Shipman argues that an already bloated carnivore guild simply didn't have room for Neanderthals anymore, and that they were effectively outcompeted by the combined super predator of humans and wolves. There is some support for this, namely the timing of things. Humans move into Europe around 45,000 years ago, Paleolithic dogs diverged from wolves around 40,000 years ago, and around that same time, Neanderthals vanished forever. It is likely that Neanderthals were simultaneously experiencing numerous negative pressures, not just the potential alliance of humans and wolves, and even Shipman doesn't suggest that this was the sole reason for their extinction, but it probably didn't help. Regardless, the human-dog relationship wasn't going anywhere. The next domesticate wouldn't be established for tens of thousands of years, and humans were quickly beginning to realize that they could take the trend that wolves started and begin to add their own input. Most specifically, they began to selectively breed their wolf companions with regard to one primary trait: friendliness. This is commonly thought to be a characteristic that is a part of the neural crest development package. As previously mentioned, wolves are hypersocial. This sets the stage rather nicely for a further selection for friendly dispositions towards humans by humans. Well, okay, it's a little bit more complicated than that. For example, we once thought that tameness and the behaviors linked to it were a part of a physiological package that could be selected for, but a study in 2014 argued that this was actually self-selected in wolves as a part of a suite of genes linked to synaptic plasticity. Wolves that were less afraid of humans were also less aggressive, but not due to some submissive nature innate to them. Rather, a nature tied to learning, cooperation, and memory set the stage. In those earliest interactions between lone wolves and human settlements, domestication wasn't triggered because of desperate wolves becoming submissive, but rather curious ones that could learn. Intelligent canines eager to cooperate for a scrap of meat on the side. I like this better personally, but they weren't just changing behaviorally. There exists a gene called AMY2B, or pancreatic amylase, that allows for starch digestion. Wolves have a few copies of it, so they can eat a little bit of starch in their diet, whereas most modern dog breeds have oodles and oodles of copies of this pancreatic amylase gene, which allows their diet to be way more varied in comparison to wolves. Now, there's another animal in the equation that eats a lot of starch. That animal is actually humans. We have an extremely starchy diet. Domestication literally changed the genetics of ancient wolves as compared to modern dogs, making their diet more in line with ours. This process is pretty easy to imagine. All that has to happen is some of these earliest Paleolithic dogs experience a small mutation that duplicates the gene that they already have and makes them slightly more adept than their peers at digesting starch. This gene proliferates, and every time a duplication occurs, they are more capable of eating the things that we eat, of utilizing and exploiting the refuse that we leave behind, and eventually you end up with modern dogs that can just as easily eat a French fry as you can. Just as the canine gut was changing, the canine brain was changing as well. Modern dogs are better than any other animal when it comes to interpreting human hand signals innately. They perform better than our closest living relatives, the panins. Not only that, but dogs are incredibly adept at understanding human facial expressions. They can read our faces when we're sad, happy, disappointed, afraid, etc. Dogs can also readily interpret human tones and know exactly how we're feeling. This is why you can come home from work and see that your dog Teddy has chewed up and eaten another bag of Trolley Bright Crawler gummy worms, which you know that she doesn't even like, and you can use this tone, Teddy, and it's over. The guilt just oozes from their faces. I bet a lot of you are nodding along out there because you've had this exact experience where your dog reads your tone and then you read their body language in return. Because no surprise, but we've been evolving alongside them as well. Not only can we tell the disposition of a dog from their body language by sight, we can also glean their disposition from sound. Humans are capable of distinguishing the mood and size of a dog just from a vocalization. It's also been argued that we have co-opted some of our hunting strategies from wolves by observing how wolves hunt and hunting with them. Most fascinatingly, humans and dogs seem to have hijacked one another's hormonal responses. Oxytocin, the hormone responsible for the mother-offspring bonding, is released in droves in the dog brain when making eye contact with their humans, and vice versa. We are both chemically altered to form more powerful relationships. This is one of the more popular examples to cite, but the 10K Dogs Project points to over 300 specific genes in dogs that underwent positive selection that have a corresponding locus in humans. This makes intuitive sense, actually, as we moved to many new locations together and had to evolve to similar pressures such as higher and lower altitudes and temperatures, or even pathogens. As previously mentioned, dogs were firmly domesticated by 14,000 years ago, and no matter where you go today, the human society there will have them. To steal a line from one of this video's sources by David Ian Howe, when Captain Cook arrived in Polynesia, he was struck that even these remote island nations had dogs. Like, isn't that kind of crazy? No matter where you go and find humans, there will be dogs there. Our dogs have been with us the entire journey as we moved across the entire planet. They're a part of our culture. We find them in our media, in our stories, in our religions, for goodness sakes. I'm gonna read a quote from researcher Mike Durr on this subject because it makes me well up every time, and I think it's pretty apt. The dog could have only arisen from animals predisposed to human society by lack of fear, attentiveness, curiosity, necessity, and recognition of advantage gained through collaboration. The humans and wolves involved in the conversion were sentient, observant beings, constantly making decisions about how they lived and what they did, based on the perceived ability to obtain at a given time and place what they needed to survive and thrive. They were social animals, willing, even eager to join forces with another animal, to merge their sense of group with the other sense, and create an expanded supergroup that was beneficial to both in multiple ways. They were individual animals and people involved, from our perspective, in a biological and cultural process that involved linking not only their lives, but the evolutionary fate of their heirs in ways we must assume they never could have imagined. Powerful emotions were at play that many observers today refer to as love. Boundless, unquestioning love. It may be kind of hokey, but I think it's pretty epic that every time we interact with our dogs, we are echoing a relationship tens of thousands of years in the making. This bond has been forged across millennia in a way that, by and large, enhanced us both. To this day, we shelter them and they defend us. We comfort one another, protect one another, and learn with one another. Our relationship is ancient and strange and lovely. It is a relationship that continues to grow, more powerful today than it was when the first ape sat by the first dog in some steppe lost to time.